Welcome to the Essence of Liberty podcast. This is the horsemanship podcast where we discuss all things liberty to help you understand, connect, communicate, and play with your horse in a gentle, subtle, and force-free way. We'll get a bit nerdy about equine psychology and learning theory to understand the science behind it all. And we'll also dive into how to motivate your horse, ways to strengthen your relationship, solving those common problems, and how to use liberty as a way to build your horse up physically, mentally, and emotionally, all in half an hour or less. I'm Dr. Nadine Lindblom, former equine veterinarian, and I'd like to invite you to join me on this journey as a student of the horse. Hello, and welcome back to another episode. In this episode, I really want to talk about one of the most common questions that I get, which is, what if you want to do liberty with your horse, but all your horse wants to do is eat the grass? And this can be quite a tricky challenge because we do want to give them the choice whether or not to participate. And if the grass is there and they make the choice to eat the grass instead, then sort of what are you supposed to do? So I wanted to take this episode to dive into this topic a little bit deeper. But first, I just want to say a really big thank you to all of you that are listening to this podcast, because we're now 7 or 8 episodes in, and I am so overwhelmed by the response that this podcast has had and the amazing feedback that I have received from you guys. I am so glad that it's helping you and that it's inspiring you and that it's giving you new ideas, because that is honestly why I created this podcast in the first place. So that's really heartwarming for me, and just thank you so much. I just really wanted to take the time to express that because I really appreciate each and every one of you that are listening to this, and especially those of you who have reached out to let me know that it's really helping you. But now back to the topic at hand, which is grass. What do you do with grass? So the first thing when it comes to grass is to know why your horse wants to graze. And this may seem like an obvious question. It's like, well, because he wants to graze, he wants to eat the grass. It's more interesting than whatever it is that we're doing. So he prefers to just eat the grass. He just wants to eat the grass. But it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. So I've broken it down for you into 4 different categories. The first 2 are probably the obvious ones. The second 2 are the less obvious ones. So number 1 is hunger. Okay, it's pretty obvious one. But if you take your horse out of a paddock where he doesn't usually have access to lush green grass, and then you put him in an area where there is this lush green grass, and perhaps he hasn't had his breakfast, or the grass is just really valuable to him because he doesn't normally have access to it, then that's going to be the reason that he wants to eat the grass. He's going to prioritize eating the grass because that is what his body is telling him to do. He's hungry, so eat the grass. If he has to work for the food rewards that you have, then he's probably going to eat the grass because it's it is more easily accessible to him. The second reason why your horse may choose to eat the grass instead of interact in the training with you is disinterest. So if you are working on something that is not terribly interesting, or if your food reward value is not really worth the mental or physical effort that is required to gain that food reward, or if your food reward value is just really low and not worth the effort, and the grass is higher value than the food reward that you're using, then that can lead to the grass being more interesting than what you are offering in the training session. The third reason is stress. So while some horses will go off their food when they're stressed, other horses will start to stress eat, and they will literally try to eat anything around them. If you give them hard feed, they may scoff their food and just eat it as quickly as they can. These horses can also get quite mouthy, and they will try to mouth anything close to them. They might even try to mouth you or even bite you as a way to try to not express their stress, but deal with their stress. They're trying to sort of calm down. It's their way of dealing with the stress. So some horses will graze if they're stressed. And this can happen if, for example, you take your horse out of the herd or out of the paddock where they're with their herd, and you take them, to the training area, which is a little bit further from their friends, and they're holding on to a little bit of stress just because they're separated from their friends and they're in a new area. Maybe something spooked them on the way up. It could be anything that's causing their stress to come up, and they're going to be more likely to want to graze as a way to try to calm themselves down. And if you then are asking things of them that they may not be familiar with, you're starting new activities, or you're trying to get them to figure new things out, that is sort of going to add to that stress a little bit, because you also are working with food rewards, and it becomes a situation where you're withholding the food reward and they're not really sure what to do, and then that's adding to the stress, and then they're just going to go and graze because it's sort of the thing that is helping them the most in that moment. The fourth reason why your horse might want to graze is because they're using it as an appeasement behavior. An appeasement behavior is a behavior that you do in order to calm down someone else, or to, if you feel intimidated by them, you will do it in order to sort of lower their aggression or lower their intimidation towards you. So in human terms, if you have someone that is intimidating you, you might break eye contact. You may use body language that shows you, hey, I'm not a threat to you. You may do as you're told in order to avoid that person becoming more aggressive to you. And horses are really, really good at appeasement behaviors. And grazing is a very classic way of appeasing, and you will see them do it to each other. And the most common example where you will see this is if you have two horses in a paddock and one biscuit of hay, and the dominant horse, dominance in terms of resource guarding, so the horse that is more dominant goes to the hay, and the submissive horse that's not allowed to come up to the hay, he will sort of be on the outside, but he wants to come in closer. So he's sort of trying to negotiate a little bit with the more dominant horse, and he's inching his way closer. But from time to time, the dominant horse will pin his ears and threaten to kick him, and he may snake his head and sort of tell him to keep his distance. And what this more submissive horse will do is he will look away and he'll say, "Oh no, I'm not doing anything." He'll just look in the other direction. And the other thing that he will probably do is he'll lower his head and he'll start grazing or pretending to graze in the area that he's in. And there may not be anything nice to be grazing on. He may just sort of be mouthing like some dirt or some roots around that area, or just be sort of using the grazing behavior to say, "Hey, I'm just here, like I'm no threat to you. I'm just grazing. I'm not doing anything." And if the dominant horse then escalates and say, "No, go away," then he will go away. But he will start to inch his way closer, and they often do that through this grazing behavior. They'll graze their way closer until they finally reach the food that the dominant horse is eating. So if you watch two horses, just watch them, because this is a really classic behavior that they'll use. They're looking away, which horses also do to us. If we get too intimidating, they will often look away, and that's the precursor to actually moving away. And moving away is a very submissive thing. If the appeasement doesn't work, they will submit and they will sort of move away. And but they will start there. They'll look away. They may lower their head and graze a little bit, and then if they need to, then they will actually move away. So if you're training your horse and he drops his head and sort of wants to graze, and you're looking at this, and I mean, maybe what he's grazing isn't very exciting, but it's like he's insistent that he wants to graze, then it can be an appeasement behavior. Especially if there's not anything nice to be grazing. It's not lush grass or anything. It's just a behavior that he's doing. And this may not actually be in relation to what you're doing on that day. It can be an anticipation of what you might start doing. So if you have a history, or if the horse has a history with being intimidated into doing different things, then he can anticipate that that's what's going to happen, and he's going to want to graze immediately as soon as you start picking up a question towards him. And this is a behavior that can become really imprinted in their mind, and it can become a really strong habit that can be hard to break, because as soon as you start asking them something, they'll just dive down and want to graze, or they will do the thing, but then afterwards they'll need to graze, which can be a little bit of a stress reliever, that they've just done the thing and it all went okay, and then they need to graze in order to sort of relieve the stress that they're holding inside them. Those are the main 4 reasons why your horse may choose to graze while you're working with them at liberty. It can be hunger, it can be disinterest, it can be stress, or it can be appeasement. So now I'll talk a little bit about what you can do in each of those situations. The main thing to remember in general with this is that working at liberty on grass, on lush green grass that the horse finds really valuable, and for the horse to still choose to participate in the session with you is a high level of liberty. It is not something that should be happening on day one, okay? It's something that you work up to. You don't start in a situation where you are around one of the most valuable distractors for the horse. You start in a more controlled environment, you build the relationship, you build the communication, you build the connection, and then you can work your way up to working with these distractions around. But to expect your horse to give you his full attention with such a powerful distractor around, it's not setting him up for success. So the first thing that you need to remember is that that's something that you work up to. A lot of people that I talk to are generally under the impression that, that you can start at liberty on grass, or like, how do you start at liberty if you have these grass distractions around? But you should set your horse up for success and try to avoid having these distractions around initially. And the thing to remember with that is the more your horse is prevented from eating grass, the more valuable the grass will become. So if you have had anything to do with like lamanitic ponies that are not allowed to eat any green grass, they think that grass is the most valuable thing in the world, and it is literally better than anything else that you could possibly offer them. They become so drawn to grass because they're not usually allowed to have it. So if your horse is a really big grass eater and he finds grass really valuable, then the best place that you can do liberty in, or you can start liberty with your horse, is in his normal paddock, in the area where he normally lives, because anything that is in that area is not going to be really valuable to him because he's always got access to it. What you don't want to do is bring your horse out from a paddock that doesn't have any good grass in it, and then put him in an area that's got lush green grass, and then expect him to pay attention to you. You can do the first few exercises like the initiation of contact and introduction to food rewards, and those are things that we go through in the academy. But the initiation of contact, introduction to food reward, and basically anything in the paddock that he's normally in, because the grass is not going to be very valuable there. So that's just advice in general, because any horse is going to think that grass that they don't normally have access to is valuable. But the first reason that we talked about was hunger. And there's a couple of ways to get around the reason why your horse wants to graze because he's hungry. And the main one is to make sure that he's not hungry. So give him a feed beforehand, or you can even leave him in the area to graze for like half an hour, or something like that before you begin the training session. If you bring him into an area where there's lush grass or grass that he doesn't normally have access to, and he's really hungry as well, then it's going to be even harder for you to be able to work with him and him to choose to give you his attention. The second reason that we talked about was disinterest. And this comes down to your technique and you being able to make sure that your horse is continuously progressing and not losing interest in the session. So you want to make sure that the effort that your horse has to put in is worth the reward that you are giving, and also that the reward is a little bit more interesting than the grass. Because if you're using really low value food reward and the grass is providing a higher value, then your horse is probably going to be more interested in the grass. So you don't have to go sky high and use sugar or licorice or anything like that, but you can just use something that's a little bit more interesting for him. And also making sure that the way that you are working with him is not frustrating for him and he's not sort of giving up, so that you are increasing everything in small increments so that he's continuously understanding and he's being rewarded and he's not left in a frustrated state or in a state where he just gives up and says it's too hard and walks away. If he's grazing because of stress, then you want to reduce the stress. So you can bring a companion up in the beginning as you're introducing your horse to liberty. You can bring a companion with him to make sure he has a little bit of moral support from another horse friend. You can do it in his usual paddock where he already has his friends around and he's in his usual environment. Just choose a time when he's already relaxed in order to introduce your horse to liberty. The fourth reason being appeasement. This comes down to going slower, waiting longer, not rushing your horse and not pressuring him to respond the way you want him to. So if you raise a question and he ducks down and starts grazing, just wait for him. Just breathe. You can even back off a little bit. You can take a few steps back and just wait for him to come back to you. So you want to raise your question and you want to give him all the time in the world to respond. And if he needs to graze for a little bit, then that's fine. You can be like, okay, I see you. That's fine. Have a little bit of a graze. I'm here for when you want to come back. You can also change the question to something that is less intimidating. So you can just ask him to target something or to do something really, really simple that he's already confident with instead of persisting with the thing that caused him to want to appease. But in general, with this, if you just wait for him to come back to you and to reinitiate the session, it tends to work really well. But this can be pretty persistent in them, and this can be a very go-to behavior. So you just have to give them time or redirect their interest or this behavior into something else. So if they do go to graze, you can just ask them to do something really simple that brings their head up. Or like, for example, targeting something, they'll have to lift their head to stop grazing and you can reward them for that. And then you can ask the question again. But I hope that gives you a couple of things to think about when it comes to your horse wanting to graze when you are working at liberty with them. You don't want it to be one of those situations where you're forcing their attention or you're, really pushing them to pay attention to you or making it uncomfortable for them when they're grazing, because that sort of defeats the purpose of liberty. It is much better to set them up for success and build up to more challenges. I really hope that helps you, and I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Please let me know what you think of this one and if you have any suggestions for future topics to cover. If you've enjoyed this episode, then don't forget that there's a free masterclass on my website that is available for anyone to watch, which gives you a little bit more of a visual as to begin liberty with your horse. And if you want to dive really deep, there's the Essence of Liberty Online Academy, which is basically this podcast, but on steroids. It is made up of 4 core modules and a bunch of bonuses, and it takes you from the very beginning of Liberty, so it's perfect for beginners if you've never done it before, and then it takes you all the way to more advanced exercises. You follow 3 horses with very different personalities, so you can generally sort of look at these horses and see which horse your horse is most similar to, and follow that horse's journey from his very first session of liberty all the way to his 13th session of liberty. There's also a bunch of videos of me working with my horses, and there's a lot more to come as well. If you want to see more details about what's included in the Academy, the link is listed in the show notes, and so is the link to the free masterclass. I really hope to see you in the Academy soon, but otherwise, until the next episode, don't forget to stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep exploring the possibilities of liberty with your horse. I'll see you in the next one.